We have some students here from government too that are using this as their hours for government class. Just for clarification, this is the budget hearing, which is required by law. And then at 8 o'clock, we have a special board meeting. They are two separate pieces. What is on the agenda for the budget hearing, you'll see in the PowerPoints. And then afterwards, you are certainly welcome to come up to the microphone if you have a Q&A on anything to do with the budget. And then at 8 o'clock, we'll also have the special board meeting, and there'll be a session, a 2-minute, as we do at all board meetings, for public comment on anything that it doesn't have to do with the budget hearing, but may have to do with what's on the board agenda for tonight. So we'll just start. Okay.
Okay, don't mind me if my eyes water. It is not because of the budget itself, it's more just the eye condition, so I promise you on that one. Okay, so really what we want to do here, and for anyone who's been part of this process before, has checked out our website, has followed the budget advisory team meetings or any of the board meetings, there have been several iterations of the version of the budget as we have gone along. So with each meeting there has been an update to the budget. So the last meeting that the budget was adopted at by the board was on April 5th. And from April 5th, we're going to talk about what was in that budget presentation and then what has happened since the board actually adopted the number and where we stand with that today. Okay, so first, going into April 5th, what we actually took a look at was a budget of $27,327,000. That was a 1.24% increase at that point in time. With the revenues on the offsetting side of $26.345 million, a 0.58% increase. And you can see the appropriations or spending was going up more than the revenues or the income. That left us a difference with a shortage of $982,000. So looking at what went into coming up with that, eliminating the shortfall, we looked at some items that were already reduced in the budget. So when we took a look at this, Sandy, I know last time you wanted to touch on a couple things that were actually in there. Was there anything in specific that you wanted to readdress this time around?
So you on the additions?
The budgetary additions going into the budget process.
The eyes in the back of my head at the moment. So I think what's important to note on here are just some different initiatives by the district of why they're important to us as additions. A mobile device management system, or an MDM, allows us to have somebody, a system, I'm not going to use the right vocabulary, but it should work for lay people, to be able to manage our iPads without actually having to put our hands on them. You do that now when you use your own. Some people you'll be able to get an app on your machine, on your phone, without somebody touching it. So an MDM is something that's really important to us, especially as we move forward to a one-on-one initiative. And moving on down toward social worker and technology teacher and AIS teacher, especially the social worker and the AIS teacher, I don't think it's any surprise when we take a look at what's happening in schools across the country is that we definitely have an increase in the number of our younger students who need intervention or have mental or emotional need mental, emotional, or social intervention, and so that's why those are on here. And then moving on down below that, the Apex Teacher Advisor and Apex Coordinator, an incredibly powerful program that allows our students who are at risk and juniors or seniors to be able to graduate on time by taking the course in another way. Then the capital outlay, these are our $100,000 projects each year that we started last year. These are not part of the capital project that the voters approved. These are $100,000 projects that we want to continue to do every single year. Bringing back the Boces Science Kits was certainly an initiative.
And can I even touch on the
Please.
capital outlay?
Yeah.
So while they are $100,000 projects, what you'll see here is a figure of $21,400.
That's a good point.
The reason why is we get money back each year. Once we got into the state queue for doing a capital outlay project, they will give us back money each year.
So it's
the
state
following year.
aidable is what you're saying.
State aidable, and
Right.
it's actually very nice. It's under 80%, but still almost 80% of the cost of doing that project comes back the following year.
So we pushed out 100,000 the first year, got
Correct.
80,000 back, so to speak. So now we
Roughly.
only have to have 20 in order to go forward
Correct.
on another $100,000 project.
The offset
So as long as we keep doing this every single year, we'll get the money back every single year. So we definitely don't want to drop, because then we'd have to have $100,000 again as a new startup. We don't want to do that. The Boces Science Kits, I'm a science person. I know that our elementary teachers really appreciate them, and we're really glad to have them come back. The QWare is another way of us being able to push things out without actually having to have hands on it. This is an opportunity for us to have some type of a technology type of scheduling, and with all the building use that we have, all of the projects that are going on, and all of the incident reports, QWare should make a huge difference, and it's certainly not that much money. And the IP camera service, this is putting cameras in the buildings, especially where we have some of our most secure areas.
And
doors.
digital as opposed to analog cameras.
Right, right. And then in terms of the reduction to the budget, there's a .17, which is a 41-minute session that runs 40 weeks of the school year, or one class running from September to June at the junior, senior high school. A .17 fax reduction as a part of the budget. A .47 computer teacher. That doesn't mean that we're reducing program in computer, though. That's going to be done by Mrs. Schnoffer, who will be moving to a K-6, so she'll be teaching K-6. What this is a reduction of the teacher who's part-time right now, and that position is being cut, but not the program. And then a special ed teacher, .17, that teacher was hired less than at a .5 in September. That addition came in January. This is taking away that .17 for next year and only moving forward on what was originally recommended to the board this past September. Then beyond that, P-TECH, as much as we love the program, and we have 2 students that are there now doing incredibly well. Each student is a $19,000. This is just not going to work for us this year. We'd certainly like to see it come back again. Supplies frozen again this year. Conferences for the board members reduced for this fall, even though the NYSBA conferences is in Buffalo. The Boces risk management, I think this is one that's very important to the district. We'd certainly like to see that happen in another year, especially with all the changes that are happening across New York State with safety. I think one of the newest changes, most of us who went to school remember fire drills. Here's a quiz. How many fire drills do you have to do in a year? Mr. Shepherd. 12, that's right. Well, now the new mandate is that you're going to have to do lockdowns. It never used to be required that way, but now you do every single year. So it's these type of changes that Boces helps us stay up front with. But Mr. Martin has agreed to do it for this coming year. And then the one-on-one tech initiative, these are iPads in the K2. And then the PPS reductions is bringing 2 students back to our home school from Liguitas. And we certainly would like to see our special ed students here as opposed to out of district anyways. Okay, you want to keep going?
Yep.
There's a recommendation on the table for reductions at the 4th grade. This is due to enrollment, although it's part of the budget. This is fewer students at the 4th grade, so there'll be 4 classrooms instead of 5. We've done that this past year. We had reductions to grades 2 and 3. So for next year, it's grade 4 due to enrollment. An item that was budgetary was a reduction at the 6th grade level to 4 teachers instead of 5. And then the associated specials for art, music, PE, and the library.
And I think what's important to note for both the 4th and 6th grade, it was not a reduction in staff. We had 2 retirements, which helped.
But they both would go from 5
Correct.
classes to 4.
That is correct.
A reconfiguration of the music. Just to give some history on this one, there was an original proposal on the table for a 4 through 12 strings teacher. I think that we listened to a number of very heartfelt concerns from parents and teachers regarding that. And so the administrative staff took another look at, is there another way that that can be supported? And so this model, it's what you have up there, right? This model basically leaves the strings position pretty much the way it was before, but adding a few music lessons for one of the grades to be certainly determined through music and the elementary principal. And then the posting will go up as a .59, general music and chorus, and this is a replacement for Mr. Vona's retirement. Again, due to lower enrollment at some of the elementary levels.
Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the revenue side of the budget. So looking at the revenue budget, a couple things to point out, and you guys have probably heard me mention this multiple times, so thank you for bearing with me just one more time as I talk about the process. So every year when we take a look at our spending and our revenues, generally speaking, since I've been here, we have seen that our spending has outpaced our revenues, which means we have a deficit each and every year. So we have been deficit spending each and every year. Probably most people in this room are very familiar with the national debt and the fact that our country deficit spends each and every year. So not a new concept for many people here, but for school districts, we don't have quite the same ability as the federal government or state government when it comes to the type of deficit spending that you actually do. So what the state says is that you must have a balanced budget before you actually adopt by the board. So to do that, you have to make reductions to spending and use some of your savings to actually equal the spending. So when we take a look at this, when we look at our spending side, and we talk mostly about the spending side through most of the budget process, but equal to that is the revenues. Now, we don't spend a ton of time on the revenues during the whole budget process because voters vote on the bottom line spending dollar. That's what you all vote on. So we actually talk about how the revenues support the spending plan, but we don't spend a ton of time. And I think we probably spent more time this year on the revenue side than in previous years. But when we take a look at our revenues, to spend a few minutes on that, we take a look at our tax levy. And the tax levy are what taxpayers or you guys actually spend to support the school budget. And we have the state funding that they give for us as well. Now, the state funding for the school district out of a $27 million budget is roughly $10 million. The tax levy, what taxpayers pay, is roughly $13.6, $13.7 million. So obviously, taxpayers are paying more than what the state is actually paying for the budget. And the rest come from other sources, whether it be federal, whether it be grants, other sources as well.
Can I just break in for a moment?
You can.
I think that there's some confusion in more than just Eden community that the GEA, or the gap elimination adjustment, just by its phrase, means that districts will no longer have to operate in a deficit. So could you talk about that for a moment?
I can. With the gap elimination adjustment, that doesn't refer to a district's gap. That refers to the state's gap. Years ago, back in about 2009, thank you, the state found itself in tough fiscal times. And what they said is, we have a gap, we, the state, have to have a gap. We need to eliminate it, so we're going to adjust you, the school districts, funding that we actually get.
And municipalities.
And municipalities. And obviously, we're focused more on schools since that's what we're here today, but you're right, absolutely, municipalities as well. So the gap elimination adjustment really wasn't the district's gap, it was the state's gap. And they took little pieces from each and every school district and municipality to balance their books. And what they had found is about 2 years ago, there was a multi-billion-dollar settlement that the state received billions of dollars from. And from that, they said, okay, now we're not in that same situation we were in 2008, 2009. Now we have more money. So what can we actually do? They didn't need to eliminate as much money from school districts, but they didn't give it all back in one fell swoop either. So they've been doing it in little bits and pieces, and they've been doing it a little bit differently for each school district. So some school districts already, prior to this year, got all their gap elimination adjustment money restored. Now, that didn't make them whole. I mean, they never had any more gap. That just means the money that was taken away from them by the state was given back. They still had deficits that they were overspending. That didn't change. And some districts still had a large portion of their gap elimination adjustment left over. Frontier, don't quote me on the exact number, but it was about $850,000 they had left for their gap elimination this year. We, the district, had about $375,000, a big difference between the two districts. So every district found themselves in a different spot as to how much GEA money they still had left. So this year, the state had vowed, well, I'll back up to January. The governor came out and said, we're going to give you some of your money back. And in his budget presentation in January, he didn't give it all back. He gave a portion of it back. So in January, he told us, Eden, out of your $375,000, we have money this year. We're going to give you money back. We're going to give you back $132,000 of that $375,000. That was good. But when you're facing a budget deficit of $2 million, it's great. Anything helps, but it certainly doesn't take care of our entire gap. But when we see in January the governor come out with his budget, That's a starting point for the state. That's not the end point. That amount right there is usually the lowest amount of state funding we're going to see from New York State. Last year, the governor didn't put out his governor's budget in January, and we were all left wondering, but this year he did. So that was a starting point. So we knew we would be getting at least $132,000 back of that GEA money. So in January, we put that into the budget, $132,000. Now, as time went on, we kept hearing from legislators, senators, that GEA was a top priority. GEA was going to be fully restored. So as we worked through our budget process in February, we said, okay, we are confident that we are going to get the rest of that GEA money back, which was about another $243,000. In fact, let me show it to you. We were confident from everything that we were hearing out there in the tea leaves that the gap money was going to be gone. So, and in fact, in March, what they ended up doing is they said, we're going to make districts whole in their gap elimination adjustment. And what's important to note about that is that phrasing by the state is really erroneous in taking a look at when you hear your gap is made whole. It's not your gap is made whole. The amount of money the state was taking away under GEA was made whole, okay? We still had a deficit. Make no mistake about that. And I know that has gone back and forth, and that has been a question. That's a legitimate question. A lot of the PR that has been put out there by the state has been, and I'll say from my personal opinion, a little fuzzy. When you hear the tax cap of 2%, everyone assumes a tax cap of 2%. You've heard me say this time and again, 2% is not 2%. Eliminating the gap elimination adjustment does not eliminate your deficit. But again, the phrasing, the way that it's actually said, puts a district in a light to say, okay, well, why are you still having problems when the state is making you whole? Why are you still having a problem when you can raise taxes 2%? Well, we weren't made whole in terms of our deficit. We weren't a tax cap of 2%. So that misperception makes all of our jobs a little bit tougher when you're thinking, hey, we're good. Because as we've seen through the budget process, we're still spending more than what we're actually bringing in revenue. So,
But having said all that, we're thrilled that the GEA is restored.
Absolutely,
Thrilled.
absolutely.
But it is important to note that for Eden, it's about half of what was restored last year. So
For the GEA, correct.
Right. So, for example, if they had given us the 300 and some thousand last year and the 600 and some thousand this year, we would be super excited thinking that we got more. But now, it's just human nature to think we got less.
Well, when we got 600,000 last year, and we had actually, and we try to do this when we can, we try to look at as many budget cuts as is potentially necessary so we don't have to go back a second time and take a look at additional cuts. It's hard going back a second time. So last year, there were cuts. If in the worst case scenario, what will we need to do? We did not expect to get $600,000 back last year, and that was a good position for the district to be in because we didn't have to cut as deeply as the board was actually prepared
And
to
we
do.
were actually able to do a tech initiative from the board, which was really nice, too.
Correct. So this year, we budgeted a little bit closer to what the numbers were actually saying. So we didn't look at additional cuts on top of. So it was a little bit closer to the budgeting for needs. But let me actually just show this here for a minute. You'll see the January aid line, you'll see anticipated aid, and you'll see the difference. And I don't have a pointer, so my apologies. So when we looked at the anticipated revenues, we start with what the governor said in January. And we said with foundation aid, the governor said in January, you're going to receive $6,712,000, which is more than last year. It's about $27,000 more than last year. That's great. We put that into our budget revenues for this coming year. For GEA restoration, the governor said, we're giving back $132,000. And again, GEA, it's not that they were giving back, they just weren't taking that money away. And transportation aid, we're anticipating transportation aid at $1.25 million, and which is higher than what we actually thought we would be getting, but that's what he said we would be doing. So when we took a look at that, we said, okay, what do we think is actually going to happen? So, and it's a crystal ball, because you never know until the budget's actually adopted at the end of March where we're going to end. So when we said, okay, foundation aid, he said 6.712. we might get maybe up to $50,000 more dollars. And the reason we said this is that the governor and the state legislators said, okay, even though that was our starting point, we have more money that we're giving back in foundation aid. In fact, millions of dollars across the state. And if you would have taken a look and divided proportionally 700 districts, we would have got more than $50,000. That's not how they actually cut the formula. So we had anticipated in the revenues 50,000, and you'll see later on we didn't get 50,000. So that's foundation aid. GEA restoration, we anticipated getting 243,000 more, or closing that gap elimination adjustment. That actually came to be if you look on the bottom. Transportation aid, we said we don't expect transportation aid to go up more. We've actually cut routes this year, so it doesn't make sense. We're going to be getting more aid, so we left that flat. In fact, if you see in April, now they're saying we're getting $1.298 million in transportation aid. And again, it doesn't make logical sense. You have to take a look at the numbers you're getting from the state and say, do they make sense? How are we going to be getting back that much additional money if we are actually cutting routes? It doesn't make logical sense. So you have to look at that. And if you see in that last number, that 46,677, I said that appears unlikely. Because again, if you have less routes, you're probably not going to see the aid because those are estimates. Okay. So taking a look at, you see the difference from where we were in February to where we were at the end of March, beginning of April.
So just to summarize it.
Sure.
I think it's 1,112
For where?
foundation aid.
1,115.
Okay, you and I keep going over the $3 back
Yeah.
and forth. The GEA restoration is solid.
Yes,
But
we
the
got it all back.
transportation aid is not.
I think that's overestimated.
Got it.
They look at proposed expenditures and say, yeah, based on that, we think we're going to give you that.
Okay, because
But-
that's an expense aid and the other two are not.
Correct.
Got it.
Yep.
Tom, is that 46, though, in the budget?
That $46,000 is not in the budget.
Because
You and
he
I
doesn't
had that
believe it's
conversation about
coming.
that. I don't think that is actually going to come in. And Mike, if you recall last year, we did put one line in the budget of additional revenue, which did not come in, so that's why we didn't put it in the budget this year. The last thing you want to do is overestimate your revenues, have them not come in, that's a bad spot, so we didn't put it in. Okay, Sandy, I'll let you touch the next one.
Okay, so basically, even though the governor's budget came in late, it came in on the 1st, which was a Friday afternoon, I spent pretty much the entire weekend with the administrative staff trying to figure out how to make up the difference of what we weren't going to get. And that's basically that $50,000 that was budgeted in foundation aid that we did not get. And so what I brought forth to the Tuesday board meeting, which was on the 5th of April, were some additional cuts from the budget that weren't there at the meeting prior. A .3 for social studies, a .3 for math, a .17 English, a .17 art. This is where we changed the configuration for the music teacher, so it's actually an additional 28,000 was in there, so the whole thing was budgeted at 32,495. And then that computer teacher, in the very beginning, what we were assuming we would do is to have Mrs. Schnoffer teach grades 2 through 6, and we would increase and leave her as part of a tech integration. In the end result, it made a whole lot more sense, and I'm sure it made her happier, to be a K-6 computer teacher, in which case this is the difference from the original budgeted amount. So there was another 14,000 cut, making a total additional staff savings of approximately 31,000.
So now, keep in mind, when you see this number on the next slide, you'll see the 31,000 on the
So I'm going to
next
point
slide.
that out on the next slide. It's the fourth one down, the 31,000. That's the additional staff savings. So I'm going to go back up to the top. In terms of being able to close that gap based on what happened to us with the foundation aid, we said we're going to leave the iPads for the K-2 initiative in the budget.
Can I even touch on
Yes.
a point even before that?
Yep.
So you see at the very top, the difference where we started was 982,074. That difference, really what that means is that's how much we're overspending. And to balance that, you either need to make other reductions or use your fund balance and reserves. So really what we were saying at that point from the prior meeting, we had planned to use $982,000 of fund balance and reserves. And you'll see at the bottom, that was brought down to 958. and we'll
Right.
keep talking about
No,
that.
that's
as
a
we go.
good point to bring up. So leaving the iPads in the budget, because my feeling really is that it would be difficult to state that we're going to have a state-of-the-art wireless system in our district and then not have the hardware to go with it. The smart tables for the pre-K classroom, back on the budget. Athletics, of a $10,000 cut, came forward. Additional staff savings we spoke about already. A use in the fund balance of $958,553 and some change, bringing us to what we believed on the 5th of April to be a 1.39% increase in something that we could deal with for the year. Do you want to jump in?
Well, that was 1.24. It ended up going to
1.24.
1.39.
Got it, 1.24%.
So on the 5th, where we started at the 958, the board actually adopted this final number that you're going to see on this slide. So this was the budget that was adopted by the board and has been put out there in publications. So they put back into the budget $41,446 and said, we will use $1 million for fund balance and reserves. So we went up from 958 to an even $1 million. Looking at that, the total budget, which we put out now, we've actually put into the state. It's out in publications. We had to adopt our budget. The board had to adopt the budget by April 22nd by state law, put that in. The number that the board adopted is finalized at $27,369,231.22. That is an increase from the previous budget of 1.39%. Now, I want to talk about this meeting versus the next meeting as well, because when you take a look at this $41,000 and you take a look at what that actually means, you're going to see in the next slide what the $41,000 represents. But before we get there, the budget, again, just as a summary, this is what taxpayers vote on. The budget for 16-17, that is what they're voting on, $27,369,231.22. That's the amount that's in the proposition. What that means for each one of you sitting here, the tax levy, what you guys would be paying for the budget, and I see there are 2 6s there, my apologies, it's 13,697. So 13,697,577. That is the tax levy amount. But again, what voters vote on is that top number, the 27,369,231. Now looking at that, when we get to the next slide, from here on out, I need to make very clear, because it becomes very confusing at this point. What the board has done at this point is adopted a budget. That's the final number. And I will tell you, each and every year, each and every district, each and every budget, that number is the final number. That does not change. What happens within that budget changes every single day. And for Mr. Branch's class here, what's good for you guys to know, a budget is a living, breathing document. It changes because we are dealing with 1,400 students. We are dealing with just shy of 300 people who work for the district. We're in a people business. Things change. It is not a set document. So when you take a look at that, as things change, while we're still in that bottom line number of 27,369, things get moved around. If a new student were to move in on the first day of the school year, and we have a new bill of $100,000, we have a new bill of $100,000. And if we are not budgeted in a line for that $100,000, we need to find it, which means we need to find it from somewhere else in the budget. We can't go over the 27,369. That means we need to tighten our belts elsewhere and still live within that budget. So that changes, that moves from line to line depending on what. There's certain things the state says you cannot move from, and we adhere to that. But as expenses change, then we roll with the punches, for lack of a better word, and do what is right for kids to actually meet the educational needs. That being said, there is talk about that $41,000, which has been put back into the budget. What needs to be made clear is that $41,000 that was put into the budget, and what happens with that $41,000 is not a budget issue. That now becomes a program issue. And we'll talk about the program side of it. And the reason why I want to point that out, because again, there has been much discussion of that $41,000 and what's going to happen with it. And it's been surrounding the budget. And it's understandable why it surrounds the budget, because it has come up during the budget time. But once that number is adopted by the board, which it is, that budget number is that budget number. So that doesn't change no matter how the composition of that $41,000 actually is handled. So I need to make clear, because I know we have a question and answer period here. And in terms of that specific breakout for the $41,000, we do have a public session at the beginning of the board meeting to talk specifically if people have questions about that breakout for the $41,000. Because again, that's not a budget issue, that is a programmatic issue in terms of the best way of which to handle those additional funds put into the budget. And I know it's confusing because they all seem to mesh together, but they are separate issues at this point once the budget's adopted. So when we take a look at this, keep that in mind as you're seeing the three options. So three options at the last board meeting were, number one, very specific of exactly where to put the money. Number one, reinstate $12,810 into the social studies area. Reinstate $15,674 into the math area. Reinstate $10,223 into the English area. Reinstate $2,739.22 into the athletic funding. The second option, the administrators have the latitude to adjust in the amount of $41,446 as the schedule becomes more clear. The third option, administrators have the latitude to adjust any all from the items listed just from above. So whereas the second issue, the $41,000 could have gone into any line within the budget, the third one says it would have to go into some fashion of the four that were listed above. Now, since no consensus was actually made at that meeting, I still need to put into the budget $41,446. That's what the board adopted. The only clear direction that was given at that meeting was option one. At this point, the funds are in option one. That doesn't mean that's where it needs to stay. The board, I know, will be talking about the best place to put those funds from a programmatic side. Again, that's not a budget side. The amount of money has been put back into the budget, and the budget has been finalized at $27,369. So that part is done. So looking into the next step, after the board met on 4 or 5, what changes have come since 4 or 5? And for that, I want to take the next two slides and have that go to the superintendent.
Okay. So since that board meeting, what some of the changes are since then is another build of the junior-senior high school schedule, certainly not final. Final schedules aren't created until July or August at best, but leading to a recommendation from me of the following: to keep the .34 FTE social studies cut, to make a .17 FTE cut in math rather than a .34, to keep the .17 cut in English, and to keep the cut in athletics of $10,000. Since the enrollment in K-12 continues to change, it means that there may be additional staffing adjustments that are, again, not budget-related. They're programmatic. This happens every single year. Some of you have seen us add teachers mid-year. I think we've done that at least once, if not twice, since 2013. If the savings results, it's recommended to hold the funds in abeyance should an additional kindergarten or an additional 6th grade TEAT class be needed based on what we find between now and August. But again, as Tom has stated a number of times, the budget remains the same no matter what. In terms of the next slide,
It's just a summary of that.
yep. So at tonight's meeting at 8 o'clock in the special board meeting, what basically, with the exception of the athletics, is on the agenda for tonight is to approve reduction of positions. Let me get a clarification, Tom. .34 or .33?
I would say that is a .34,
Okay.
because you do .17, .17.
Yeah, but I gotta look on the chart before
Right.
then. And then on the next slide, what about a contingent budget?
Okay, so that's the budget side, and we will talk the programmatic side at the special board meeting. On the budget side, going back to the budget, we took a look at the bottom line dollars, which was $27,369,231. Now, every single district has to take a look and say, what happens if we go to a contingent budget? What does that actually mean? And again, I would say any of the programmatic changes really is not part of the contingent budget, because in a contingent budget, we actually have less to spend. The tax levy remains what it was last year. So we actually have less to spend than we do under the current budget. But taking a look at that, the contingent budget using last year's tax levy, meaning last year what the taxpayers paid, will go down to $27,242,000. So in the old days, you would say that, okay, athletics, there'd be no transportation anymore, there wouldn't be building use by outside groups.
That's what the state required.
Back in the day, that is what the state required. The state has changed that now and said in a contingent budget, there still are athletics. There still is building use. So that part stays in the budget, whether it's a regular budget or a contingent budget. So you look at 3 different areas that are affected by contingent budget: administrative, capital or equipment, and program.
Can you define administrative?
Administrative are support. So support functions, so not direct student
Not
related.
administrators alone?
Not administrators. So that's support function. So anyone, let's say, who's in a personal contract. For example, anyone who's in a personal contract, their contract amount remains the same as last year, in essence, is really what that boils down to. And that would be $8,127. On the equipment side, anything that is not health and safety related would be eliminated from equipment purchases or computer hardware. So health, safety, computer hardware, equipment purchases stay in the budget. All other equipment purchases get eliminated. So that would be equipment purchases of $111,000. That means the remainder, because we try and not affect students as much as possible, the remainder, which is the smallest portion, comes from the program budget, which is the instructional, student-related, and that would be $6,339. And that's if we went to a contingent budget. So now what we want to do, and Lucinda, I know the microphone at the podium is up, so what we want to do is we do want to open it up to the floor to see what budget questions there are. Again, keeping in mind that the programmatic conversations in terms of the staffing will come up shortly at the special board meeting. So we appreciate that. Okay. Any questions or comments?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay, then why don't we take a brief break and begin at 8 o'clock. We'll give everyone a chance to use the restroom, come back, and we'll start at 8 o'clock with the the special board session. Thank you, everyone.